Marking its 40th anniversary in 2022, Blue Door is the largest emergency housing provider in York Region, providing life-saving support to children, youth, adults, seniors, and families at risk or experiencing homelessness. Along with offering emergency housing and housing retention support, in the past 2 years, Blue Door has expanded its service offering to further work toward preventing and ending homelessness through Inclusion, the first supportive housing program for 2 SLGBTQ+ youth in York Region. Construct, a social enterprise by Blue Door, providing supported skills training to help youth and adults break barriers to employment and secure meaningful careers in construction trades. And launching in 2022, a health hub which will include a nurse and in-reach system navigator to help people regain the health and well-being needed to secure and retain permanent housing. Join Blue Door's mission and become part of the solution by learning more at bluedoor.ca.
We at On the Way Home would like to acknowledge the original stewards of whose lands this podcast is recorded on. In York Region, we recognize we're on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and that this is the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And in Vancouver, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, whose presence on these lands continue to this day.
Welcome to On the Way Home, a podcast dedicated to the issues surrounding homelessness and the incredible experts making a difference in the lives of homeless people. Remember to subscribe to the podcast anywhere you're listening and share it with a friend.
Welcome to another episode of On the Way Home. I am Michael Braithwaite, your host, coming to you from Blue Door up in York Region. Hey, this podcast is put together by Blue Door and our good friends at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. And guess what's happening at the Canadian Alliance right now? They are gearing up for the 2022 conference. It's going to be exciting. And so look for that on cah.ca. For pretty soon, you'll have early registration on that. And speaking of which, they just put out a little bit of information around the keynotes from the 2021 conference. They were awesome. Go check them out. You could get those on their website, along with all sorts of stuff from Built for Zero as well, the campaign. There's good stuff happening in Moncton, in Whitehorse, and around quality by names lists, reduction of chronic homelessness. So go check that out. And if you're a community interested in becoming a Built for Zero community, reach out to them at cah.ca. And hey, what's happening at Blue Door? Well, don't you know, this is our 40th year of operation. I know we seem so young and fresh, but we've been doing this work for 40 years and much has changed. So lots of different things happening to celebrate 40 years of operating in York Region. I say York Region, we have recently expanded our construct, that's our social enterprise, our construction social enterprise, into Durham. And guess what? I think we are going into Peel as well. So all along the top of the GTA, because it's needed, man. You know, giving people meaningful work and a great rate of pay to actually prevent them from falling into homelessness. Who knew that works? We did. We're pushing that forward. For all your construction needs, reach out to Blue Door and we'll get our construction company there. But hey, if you're not in York Region, there are construction social enterprises all over Canada through our TradeWorks program sponsored by the Home Depot. And so, listen, if you have construction needs, you're somewhere in Canada, you're listening, reach out to me at michael.b@bluedoor.ca. I'd be happy to connect you to one of our partners in and around the country. So you can hire anyone to do the work. Why not hire a social enterprise? High quality work, fair price, but hey, there's some social good to it as well. So why not do that? And if we can't lean on our social sector service partners to prop us up, who can we count on? But enough about us at Blue Door. Let's get to today's guest. I'll tell you something that's just a fun fact. Today's guest, John Neufeld from the House of Friendship. So John and I connected. He is going to the Governor General's Canadian Leadership Conference. Yes, very fancy in 2022. This conference, because of the pandemic, has been put off for a couple of years, but excited. I'm part of the alumni. So in 2017, I went to Prince Edward Island. They put you in little groups. You go across the country. It's awesome. You have people from labor, from nonprofit, from the business world, from all over the country that come together. So it's really, really cool opportunity. But John and I connected through that. But here's our bigger connection. I am very proud to put on my LinkedIn page that my first job was that of a dishwasher. It really kind of shaped and formed me, and also pointed to what I didn't want to do for the rest of my life in St. Catharines. John said, St. Catharines, where did you work? Mother's Pizza, I know that place. John is also a Niagara, was a Niagara resident. So we connected through that, talked some old school stories about St. Catharines and growing up there, and Mother's Pizza. That has been a variation of different things since, not because of my dishwashing duties. It just has over time. But I regress. But here's really what John is all about. He is a grateful husband and proud father of 2 children. And since 2009, John has had the privilege of serving as the executive director of House of Friendship, a multi-service organization focused on housing, addictions treatment, food security, and neighborhood development. John has a Bachelor of Theology and Arts, a Master of Social Work, and Master of Business Administration. Man, very, very well qualified. We'll let him pass. He received top 40 under 40 in Waterloo Region, a distinguished alumni from Canadian Mennonite University and University of Waterloo. John enjoys traveling with his family. I don't know when he does that, when he finds the time, spending time with friends, movies, reading business and fiction, squash, and technology. And listen, I connected with John after that, and I love it. He's a disruptor. He knows that business as usual is not getting business done. So he's doing super cool things in Waterloo Region. And you know what's also cool about that is he wants to share that. He wants others to say, hey, we did this, it worked, learn from us, learn what not to do too, and we'll share that with you. And he's going to talk about some of those things. So I'm so excited to have connected with John and to have him on the show. John, welcome to the show.
Michael, so good to be reconnected with you, and it's amazing how Mother's Pizza just continues to bring people together all these years later.
Yeah, and it was not the pizza, let me tell you. It was not that. That's one of the reasons it may not be around anymore. John, we ask a standard question because it means something a little different to every guest that comes on. But I want to ask you, what does home mean to you?
Home is where you belong. I've had my thinking of home radically shifted and influenced, obviously, by the people we serve and walk with, but also by Richard Wagamese, one of Canada's greatest Indigenous writers. And he wrote a book called Ragged Company. And, if you haven't read it, I would highly encourage it. Story of 4 individuals who are on the street and they stumble upon a $13 million lottery ticket. And it really gives you an insight of what home really is. I'll leave it at that.
Very cool. That's the first time we've got a reading recommendation out of that question. So check that out. I can't wait to take a look. So let's talk about the house that Friendship built, House of Friendship. What can you tell me about it? What does it do? Give us the dirt.
Michael, what I'm most proud of is that when I think about House of Friendship, it was founded 83 years ago in a time just like this, right? The Great Economic Depression, World War II. There was just like the whole world was struggling. A lot of stuff didn't make sense. And in the midst of all that chaos, the small group of women came together here in Waterloo Region and said, hey, we can't change the world, but there's something that we can do. And they started noticing that, there was these individuals. Back then, they were so lovingly called hobos and transients that had nowhere to go, no family, no work. And so they did this radical, courageous act of hospitality and invited them in and just gave them a meal. And, that small group of women was probably scared because they were strangers, they were different, they didn't know who these individuals were, and they just gave them a place to belong, to give them a meal. And, 83 years later, now we're serving those 5-6 individuals that we did in 1939 to serving over 40,000 individuals a year, by providing food, addictions treatment, housing, and community support in low-income neighborhoods. But it was all because a small group of individuals came together and said, we're not going to change the whole world, but there's something we can do. And I think that's sort of what we hold on to. And continue that work in that spirit till this day.
Yeah, it really kind of started on that little thing of kindness, right? Let's just, if we could be kind show kindness to a few people through these actions, change can happen. And that kindness has spiraled to 40,000 people in the work that you do. That's not giving it justice. You and I have chatted before, and we could go on for hours talking about different innovations, what's working, what's not. And listen, the last 24 months, extremely tough for everyone, way tougher for our most vulnerable. You and the team could have sat back and said, woe is us. But you knew that wouldn't get the job done. You've been extremely busy, and even before that, you are very innovative, and you're creative in the work that you're doing to prevent and end homelessness. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your exciting projects?
Yeah, Michael, let's go back a bit and just talk and think about how we address homelessness. It's absolutely absurd, and and we don't think of it because we're swimming in that water every day, and so we keep doing things the way we've always done them, and you don't realize it. But imagine you get a cancer diagnosis, and you come to the cancer treatment center, and you're given a bed and a meal, and then the nurse or doctor looks at you and says, "But we're not going to give you chemo, we're not going to give you radiation, but you could stay here for a few months, make yourself comfortable." I mean, we would never allow that, and yet, in our work, that is what we do and have been doing for decades so that we can make ourselves feel better and say, well, at least they're not on the street, they're not freezing to death. We put a roof over their head, we've given them a meal, but we're not addressing the underlying issues. And so that's where sort of the vision for shelter care came out of is, if we don't integrate healthcare into providing shelter, nothing's actually ever going to change or move forward. And it's even more vital in today's context. I mean, the synthetic drug era is here. It has completely overwhelmed all of us in this sector over the last 5 years. It's literally killing people every day, the people that we serve. That our team members who are serving in this field are also having traumatic experiences as a result of everything they're going through. So just putting a roof over someone's head doesn't cut it anymore. And it's really hard to wrap our heads around the devastation that we're experiencing and seeing. And so it was already the way we were addressing it. I said, before 5 years wasn't good enough. And now it's even more vital in the synthetic drug era.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so what you're talking about, you talked a little bit about, we're here's some of the things we have to address. We're not going to end it if. So what is how's the friendship doing about it? What actions have you guys taken?
Yeah. So let me, how did we get here? And Michael, let's be honest, you and I aren't the two brightest fellows ever, but I think one of the things that we've learned is that when we watch other innovators or we watch other people doing really work that we admire and respect, is you notice that they're curious, they're willing to learn, they're willing to take risks and fail. And so that's what we did 7 years ago. We were really curious about the managed alcohol program that Shepherds of Good Hope was running in Ottawa. And, we heard that, it's this great program, great outcomes. And so 7 of us went down to Ottawa to learn more about it. And I am forever grateful for that day because I met now a lifelong friend, Deirdre, who said, well, if you guys are going to travel all the way out here, I'm going to show you everything. And she toured us around all of Shepherds of Good Hope. And it was when we were standing there in the shelter, this kind of, it was one of those, transformational experiences in one's career where you see something, the light bulb goes on, and it's like so simple, yet it's so profound. And as we're standing there getting a tour, 2 individuals were brought in. I don't know, by ambulance or police, I can't remember because they never stuck around. They just immediately took off. But these individuals were highly unwell, highly under the influence, were not in good shape. And what I observed was as they came through their doors, someone shouted out their name with joy. And I felt like I was in an episode of Cheers, when Norm walks through. And now we've just lost all of our young listeners who are like, what? There was a show called Cheers, and who's this guy Norm? But it was that moment, and the level of dignity that was there. And then, a nurse came in, took the vitals of these individuals, and they just addressed the situation head on. And I was like, what is going on here? What do you mean the police and ambulance just dropped them off here instead of taking them to the emergency department? No, we have nurses here integrated. We have the healthcare integrated. And it was just kind of this like aha moment, like, why are we not doing this in our own community? This makes so much sense. And, and then Deirdre, talked to me about Dr. Jeff Turnbull, Wendy Muckle from the Ottawa Inner City Health Alliance and what they've been doing over these years. And so we had all this like inspiration, this excitement and movement. And then we came back home and guess what we did, Michael?
Nothing?
Absolutely nothing. You nailed it. You nailed it. Why? Because we're too busy doing what we're doing, right? We've got so much on our plates, and you got to just do what you got to do to survive. And you know what? Thankfully, there were some team members that said we can't just keep talking about it. And there was an incredible donor who was willing to make a heavy investment, and we started an innovation fund. And the donor's instructions to us were just don't be afraid to fail. Like that was the only stipulation on that donation. And we thought, well, hey, we don't know how shelter care will look like in this community. We have some ideas from Ottawa. And so that gave us the impetus to try something new and not be afraid to fail. And I'm so forever grateful for that donor and that vision. And so we started and we started plugging away at it, started having conversations. And then on October 2019, at our fundraising dinner in front of 650 people, influencers, elected officials, community leaders, we just pitched this vision. We said, we're not sure how this is going to look, how we're going to make it happen, but here's the vision. What we know that if we do not address the underlying issues of homelessness, it's never going to get better. And we pitched this vision. Dr. Jeff Turnbull was so grateful that he created a little video for us saying, here's why it's important and here's why it works. And so the community got all excited. Little did we know that just 5 months later, a global pandemic would hit us. And the timing it was incredible because on March 19th, 2020, we were stuck. We had like 50 guys crammed in a 12-bedroom house in downtown Kitchener for our shelter. And we were going to do a public outbreak. And remember, in March 2020, we were all freaking out. We didn't know what we were doing. None of us did, right? Masks. And, we've got so much knowledge 2 years later. But back then, if you can go back in time and re-traumatize yourself and remember what it was like, we were like, oh my goodness, we can't stay here. And I got a call from the Radisson Hotel saying, how can we help? And I said, well, I have to move our whole shelter into your hotel. And I'll never forget their response. They said, we'll be ready for you tomorrow morning. And so literally we moved our whole shelter in overnight to the Radisson. But what we did immediately is we said, look, this is our excuse to now pilot shelter care. Let's integrate that healthcare. And so we asked our healthcare providers to come in, and they set up a little shop in the conference room in the basement of the hotel. And our numbers increased with the people we were serving. And then I started hearing months later from the residents, the healthcare practitioners, that they're like, this is different. The outcomes are different. The guys are having better outcomes. And so we did some data about 6-7 months in, and we noticed our overdose rates dropped in half. Staff violence or resident violence towards staff decreased. Police and ambulance involvement dramatically dropped. And so we knew there's something here, which we shouldn't be surprised. It's a little bit like being surprised that if you go to a cancer center and you get chemo and radiation, that your cancer might get better. And so we just were kind of moved by it. But listen, there have been so many difficult challenges that have happened since that time, and it's not been easy. But that was sort of the beginning of, we're on to something. We used that sort of the pandemic as an excuse to start moving forward.
Very, very cool. Yeah, and again, many people during the pandemic would have said not the right time to start something new. You went the opposite way and said, of course it is. Now, I'm sure there's been lots of success. Have there been some challenges, and what have they been?
Michael, they've been very significant. So, yeah, when you're trying something new and it's going to disrupt systems, and it's challenging to everyone. And so what happened is we actually moved to another hotel and signed a 1-year lease to kind of further out this model, try to iterate, try to improve on what we learned from the first 6 months. We were just there for a few months, and on February 9th, 2021, tragedy hit, and we had a massive fire in the hotel. And right in the evening, it was a cold night. We've got 130 people standing there in a parking lot, cold. And then we actually had the isolation unit. So we had a number of people with COVID also there. And, for the leaders listening to this, these kind of moments, right, that could just break you. And it was just an incredibly difficult time. And what are you going to do? And you start calling around, and there's nowhere to go. And you got 130 people, dislocated in the cold. And thankfully, neighboring community, there was a hotel that was empty and said yes to us. And so we moved everyone there, thinking we'd be there for a few months. Ended up staying there for a much longer time because we couldn't find a location back home. And I think people listening to this podcast involved in this work understand nobody wants us. We're serving the unwell and the unwanted, right? It's always the wrong neighborhood. It's always the wrong location. There's not the zoning. There's not, there's 100 excuses and reasons why not. And so that was really challenging. And it was probably one of the lowest points for us as a team. We were questioning whether we should even be doing this work anymore, because it was just, the barriers were just too hard. So in the midst of it, we stumbled upon a hotel that was willing to sell, and so we started looking at it, and it's absolutely absurd. Where are you going to get the money to buy a hotel, right? And so you're like, what are you thinking? And you think, man, this could change everything. If we had this amount of space and we could put a health clinic in here, like shelter care. I think we're on 4.0 now. Like, this could really give it the base to really go to the next level and have a huge impact. And again, barrier after barrier, trying to convince multiple levels of government, high risk. It wasn't looking really well. And to the credit of our MPP, Mike Harris Jr., who was champion shelter care, understood the vision behind it, and, spoke to the health ministers and others, Mr. Clark, and got behind it and said, how can we make this work? And really pleased to say that in January 12th, an announcement was made that there was some funding for that would allow us to buy this hotel. We bought an old Comfort Inn hotel in Waterloo, Ontario, that we're going to be, construction is happening now. We're converting into essentially a 100-bed shelter care facility. And we're going to see where it goes. There's lots of challenges with it. It's not a silver bullet, but we're really excited to see what this next stage will bring and what we can learn.
Very, very cool. And like your team just pushed right through, and that's what it takes, right? Let's talk about the future of shelter care. So we have shelter care. You've learned from others, and funny, both Dr. Jeff, as he told us to call him, he was one of our first guests on the way home, just a salt of the earth guy, Jeff Turnbull. And then Deirdre is going to join us soon as well. And it's interesting, and she'll talk more about their diversion program that you spoke about as well, which is incredible. But let's talk about House of Friendship. Let's talk about shelter care. What are your future plans?
So my future plan, or what my future hope would be, is that that shelter care becomes sort of a standard, that we start looking at that dignified care that integrates healthcare into shelter is sort of what's normal, versus it being some innovative thing, or that that it's a pilot. And like you've said, we've made a ton of mistakes. We've learned a lot. We hope that we could share that learning and and that sort of is the way we do it. I think the second thing I kind of hope for the future, Michael, is that that shelter care is seen as an integral part of the housing first model. I think sometimes what we do is we pit shelters against housing or housing first, or somehow they're incompatible. And our experience has been when we move someone immediately out and put them into housing, there's so many housing breakdowns, and they come back to our shelter over and over, and there's kind of this revolving door. And what we've found through the 2 years of doing shelter care is people aren't coming back because they've had some of the underlying issues addressed, or they've been given some assistance with mental health, with their addiction, with their physical health. And so, we set them up actually to make housing first far more successful. So those would just be a couple of my hopes for the future.
Absolutely. If there was a green button, I'd be hitting it all the time. Just around, you put people in housing, if their healthcare's not looked after, if they're not set up with doctors and they don't have places to go, that housing more than likely will not last, right? We want it to. You're right. You don't want people repeating, coming back to the shelters. This is preventative, in a sense, in nature. So, hey, listen, listeners, groups across the country, if you're looking at shelter care, I know John is a very busy guy, so to volunteer this, but he's got a great team. We've talked with him at Blue Door. We recognize how important health is to housing people and keeping people healthy. So reach out to John and his team, and I think maybe together, John, too, right? If there's more people doing this type of work, we have more of a platform too to go to government with a scale of this to say, hey, invest this, and you can help way more people. And I think with in Ontario, anyways, with a conservative government, you also want to show how fiscally responsible it is too, because it's saving a lot of dollars. Healthier people don't go to the ERs as much, are housed, are not going to the shelters, right? So it's saving lives and saving dollars. So do you agree?
Absolutely, and we do have some research happening on actually 2 shelter care pilots in the province, and so hopefully we can share that and learn more for others.
Awesome. So what are you excited about? I know shelter care, of course. What are you excited about in the next year at House of Friendship?
Yeah, Michael, there's a lot. So because our old shelter is kind of dilapidated and we've got some land in downtown Kitchener, we're actually building a supportive housing build. We're just finishing up the design there, so hoping to actually create a supportive housing community. We already have some supportive housing buildings on this campus. We want to add a 3rd building, but we don't want to just provide housing. So putting in a health clinic there, a cafe, a gym, a walking track. Just like I said, we want it to be a home for all these folks living in these supportive housing units. It's more than just a home, and they can feel like they can belong. And so there's that. We finished building a new addiction treatment center during the pandemic. Our addictions team has really pivoted in sort of addressing the changing needs of people struggling with addictions in the community. I'm really proud of how they're changing their approaches and how to best serve the community. And then we also have this incredible community services group that has this vision to change the odds for kids and youth and families living in poverty. And I just think the prevention work is so incredibly important. And it's one of the things I love about House of Friendship is we sort of have many of the social determinants of health under one roof, and we get to work together at these things. But I do want to say something, Michael, for the listeners on this, as excited as I am, I also want to acknowledge what all of us have been through the last couple of years. And, sometimes when I listen to folks and they tell me about all the great things they're doing and their innovation, you kind of sit there and you're like, well, what's wrong with me? Or we're not doing this or that. And so, obviously today I've told you about all the good stuff, but I want to acknowledge that things have shifted in our world. I talk about the synthetic drug era, over the last 5 years. It's just hit us so hard. Homelessness has increased across many parts of this country. And, people have admirably tried to respond to the best of their abilities during the pandemic, but it's taken a toll on all of us and our teams. And it's, I know I've been at some of the lowest points through that. And so I just want to acknowledge that. I want to thank everyone. I mean, my guess is if you're still listening to this podcast, you're passionate, you care, you want to make a difference. And so I just want to acknowledge everything that, we've all collectively been through together as a sector. And I would just encourage all of us, if I have a confession to make, and I think Michael will back me up on this, is none of us know what we're doing if we're really, really honest. I think some of us just put on a bit of a better show. We're all learning, and the amount of change that's happening in the sector, in the broader world, none of us are wired to be able to kind of manage, handle, process it all. We need each other. We need our teams. We got to stick together. And I just want to encourage you just to try things, because what we've done or going back to the past isn't going to help us. It's not going to change us. It's not going to have the outcomes we want. So you've got nothing to lose. The worst thing that can happen is you try something, it fails, but you're probably going to learn something from it that you can benefit from or others can. Let's just try different things. We've got literally nothing to lose. We have so many other communities across the world that we can learn from. It's why I love this podcast and hear and be inspired by them. Just keep trying, keep failing, keep making mistakes, keep learning, and just thank you to everyone listening for the impact that you're having with the people that you're walking with.
Well said, John. I think that, listen, we're in a drug crisis. We are in a homelessness crisis, and we can't afford to move at a slow speed. People's lives depend on it. So it's going to take some risk. You're going to have to fall sometimes. That's okay. But listen, there's great stuff happening across the country. There's great stuff happening around the world that you could borrow with. This is a very sharing and giving community, like you said, with shelter care. Where can people go to find out about the awesome work you and your team are doing?
Yeah, so 2 places. So there's a dedicated site for sheltercare.ca about that, and then houseoffriendship.org.
Very cool. And I know on that shelter care website, right at the front, you start with, here's some of the stats, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which you're like, wow. So go check that out. It's very cool. And John, I love what you were saying too, is that you are not just building housing, you're building community. Because I think sometimes that's forgotten, right? We've talked about this before. Sometimes people really love staying in the emergency housing shelter system because they've got a bunch of buddies, they've got staff that care, they got meals that come in, someone cares when they're leaving and showing up. And then we put them in housing and they lose that sense of community. So community is really essential to, as you said at the very beginning, what home meant to you, to belonging and staying. So this has been a fascinating show. We've learned so much. Love your enthusiasm, your innovation, and your honesty as well. Awesome to have you on. Keep doing the life-changing work you're doing. Thanks to you and your team.
Thanks, Michael.
Wow. You know what? Yes, we love to share information we put on this podcast to create awareness, education, share. But to me, too, selfishly, it's fascinating to talk to our guests and hear about the great work happening and about people being really honest, too. Here's what's working. Here's what's not. Here are the challenges. We're okay to hear about a donor that's saying it's okay to fall on your face, right? But I want you to push forward because that's where the best work happens. We heard that today. Listen, share this podcast with your network, subscribe. If you know of someone you have something to say, you've got something to share, you know some great work happening, reach out to me at michael.b@bluedoor.ca. Check out past podcasts at onthewayhome.ca or at the bluedoor.ca page or cah.ca. You could find us there and everywhere you find podcasts. Another great guest on the way home. We will see you next time.